Most people hear the word Vikings and instantly picture fire, blood, longships, and villages being torn apart. Fair enough, that image didn't come from nowhere. But here's the twist nobody talks about. Vikings spent far more time being bored than being at war. Shocking, right? Raids were seasonal. Battles were rare. Winters were long, brutal, and painfully repetitive. So what happened when these fiercely energetic Norse warriors had nothing to conquer? Well, that question reveals a side of Viking culture that completely rewrites history as most people know it. Imagine living in freezing Scandinavia over 1,000 years ago. No smartphones. No streaming platforms. No football championships on weekends. Just endless snow, rough terrain, and a village full of highly competitive warriors with way too much energy. What could possibly go wrong? Quite a lot, actually. The Vikings didn't simply play games, they weaponized entertainment. One of their most infamous activities was natleikur, a chaotic sport mentioned in medieval Icelandic sagas. Historians often describe it as a savage blend of hockey, rugby, and handball, except with fewer rules and significantly more broken bones. According to the Egil saga, disputes during these games often escalated into real fights. Yeah, imagine arguing over a soccer foul today and someone pulling out an axe. And that wasn't all. Wrestling matches were common, horse fights entertained crowds, and some young warriors even tested their courage through dangerous climbing competitions and endurance contests. Anthropologist William Ian Miller noted how Norse societies deeply valued physical dominance and public reputation. Winning these brutal games wasn't just fun, it elevated social status. In many ways, boredom pushed Vikings to create adrenaline before modern extreme sports ever existed. And strangely enough, their next way of fighting boredom was far quieter, but even more powerful. Now here's where things get fascinating. After the chaos of raids, brutal sports, and survival battles, Viking nights often looked very different. Picture a freezing winter evening, the wind howling outside, fire crackling in the center of a wooden hall, and warriors sitting together with hours of darkness ahead of them. No internet. No television. No distractions. Just silence. Unless someone started telling a story. And oh, they became masters at it. The Norse sagas were born in these moments. Stories about revenge, honor, betrayal, gods, monsters, and impossible journeys spread through oral tradition long before they were ever written down. Scholars from the University of Iceland have highlighted how oral storytelling preserved historical memory across generations in Nordic societies. And these weren't simple bedtime stories. Many contained layered characters, moral ambiguity, family politics, and emotional depth that would later influence writers like J.R.R. Tolkien and even modern franchises such as Game of Thrones. Think about that for a second. A bored Viking trying to entertain friends around a fire may have helped shape modern fantasy storytelling. But storytelling wasn't the only quiet obsession they developed when restlessness kicked in. Their hands needed something to create too. This is the part that completely messes with the mindless barbarian stereotype. People often imagine Vikings as dirty warriors smashing everything they touched. But archaeological discoveries tell a very different story. When they weren't raiding or competing in brutal games, many Vikings became remarkably skilled artists. And honestly, their craftsmanship was ridiculously advanced for the time. A bored Viking with a knife, wood, and patience could create breathtaking carvings filled with serpents, dragons, and intricate geometric patterns. Archaeologists discovered stunning examples aboard the Oseberg ship in Norway, where detailed wooden artwork survived for centuries. Their metalworkers also crafted elegant swords, brooches, rings, and necklaces that are now displayed in places like the British Museum. According to archaeologist Neil Price, Viking art wasn't just decoration, it reflected identity, religion, and status. Funny enough, while their hands created beauty, their minds were becoming even sharper through another unexpected obsession. Here's something Hollywood rarely shows. Vikings weren't just physically dangerous, they were mentally competitive too. When storms kept them indoors or voyages were delayed, they often turned to strategy games that tested patience, intelligence, and psychological control. One of the most famous was Hnefatafl, often called the Viking chess game. It involved defending a king while attackers attempted to trap him, a game of strategy that mirrored real battlefield tactics. Archaeologists have uncovered game boards and carved playing pieces across Viking settlements in places like Greenland, Iceland, and England. Researchers from the National Museum of Denmark suggest these games helped sharpen planning skills that translated into warfare and leadership. And then there were riddle competitions. Verbal battles where losing could damage your reputation. Imagine getting roasted publicly in front of your entire village because you couldn't solve a riddle fast enough. Brutal. Just without the axes. And eventually, even games couldn't contain their restlessness. Some Vikings looked at the ocean and thought something truly insane. What if we just keep sailing? And this might be the wildest consequence of Viking boredom. Some voyages were clearly driven by trade, war, or expansion. But others, they seem to have started with pure curiosity and a dangerous amount of confidence. Imagine looking at an endless ocean with primitive navigation tools and saying, let's see what happens. That was very much Viking energy. They sailed farther than most civilizations of their era dared to imagine, reaching Iceland, Greenland, parts of Russia, the Middle East through trade routes connected to Constantinople, and eventually North America at Lance aux Meadows Norse settlement nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Archaeological evidence confirmed this when Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and archaeologist and Stein Ingstad discovered Norse settlement remains in Canada in the 1960s. Their boredom didn't just create adventures. It accidentally rewrote global history. And once you connect all these pieces together, a much bigger truth begins to emerge. And that's the part most history books completely miss. When people reduce Vikings to violent raiders, they erase something far more fascinating. These were people who refused to stay mentally stagnant. Their boredom became a catalyst for innovation. They transformed empty time into competition, storytelling, craftsmanship, strategic thinking, and exploration that would echo for centuries. Think about it. How many people today complain about boredom while scrolling endlessly for hours? Vikings had no modern conveniences, yet somehow turned restlessness into creation. They built stories that influenced modern fantasy. They created games that sharpened intelligence. They produced art that still fills museums. They explored continents they weren't even supposed to know existed. Psychologist Sandy Mann has argued in modern studies that boredom can stimulate creativity because it forces the brain to seek novelty and meaning. Ironically, Viking history may be one of the greatest real-world examples of that theory in action. So maybe the real lesson isn't about ancient Scandinavia at all. Maybe it's about what someone does when life becomes repetitive. Do they numb themselves? Or do they create something unforgettable? The Vikings answered that question 1,000 years ago, and their fingerprints are still everywhere. And once people truly understand how ancient humans transformed boredom into innovation, they start seeing modern life very differently.